They called it a routine inventory check, just another Tuesday sweep at the State Veterans Facility's third-floor hospice unit. But what they found above bed 319 wasn't routine at all. The old woman who'd lain there for nearly 6 months without a single visitor, who rarely spoke and never boasted, had passed away quietly in the night. The nurse on duty barely looked up when the med techs came to clear her things. "Never did much," she muttered, scribbling notes. Said she used to be someone. Probably just administrative. But when the intern assigned to log personal effects opened the dusty compartment above the bed, everything stopped. A sealed shadow box, untouched for decades, was wedged behind her oxygen machine. Inside, medals no one recognized. Not just bronze stars, but foreign commendations with inscriptions in Pashto, a ribboned insignia issued only to field medics during Operation Daggerlight, an op still half classified. And at the bottom, folded crisp as the day it was received, a letter signed and pinned by General Lorenz K. Bradford, stamped, personal, for Lena Avery only. The intern asked, who was she? And no one in that room had the answer. But someone would. If you believe that real warriors aren't always loud, if you believe dignity doesn't need to announce itself, like and subscribe. Because sometimes the quietest people carry the heaviest stories. And this one, it changed how everyone in that building saw service forever. But it started not with medals or letters. It started in a beige folding chair, in the corner of a crowded veterans conference room, 2 weeks before her name would ever be known. That morning, the VA Regional Leadership Summit was running behind. Coffee had gone lukewarm. Clipboards shuffled in every corner. About 30 veterans sat waiting for a joint panel on military reintegration and systemic accountability. Some leaned back in their chairs, others scrolled through phones. A few swapped stories about deployments, throwing around names of bases, firefights, and ranks like poker chips. Then she walked in. No ceremony, no introduction, just a plain brown coat, thick gray hair tied back with a pencil, and a cane she barely seemed to need. Name tag read, Dr. L. Avery, clipped to her shoulder like it had been forgotten. She moved slowly, but not unsteadily, taking a seat in the back corner, notebook already in hand. No one paid her much attention. Not at first. But 2 rows ahead, Lieutenant Kyle Merritt nudged his buddy, Sergeant Nate Jorgensen, and gestured with a half-smirk. "Bet she's never seen combat," he muttered under his breath. "Probably filed paperwork in the air-conditioned part of the war." They laughed quietly, not maliciously, but with that casual arrogance that comes from youth and medals still shiny. A few heads turned. One woman, Malika, a new amputee with a sleeve where her arm should be, just stared. She'd noticed something in the woman's walk, a stiffness too deliberate to be from age alone. "She looks familiar," Malika whispered, more to herself than anyone else. But Merritt had already launched into an imitation of slow typing, pretending to duck under imaginary desk fire. "Incoming faxes," he said under his breath, and someone snorted nearby. The room rustled. No one called it out. Avery didn't react. She just kept writing, flipping a page slowly, her left hand tracing something invisible into the margin. If she'd heard the remarks, she gave no sign. But she did glance once, not at the men laughing, but toward the far window, eyes narrowing briefly at the sound of a helicopter far in the distance. That's when the lead moderator walked in, clipboard in hand, smiling brightly like this wasn't a room full of overlooked trauma. "Let's start with something simple," she said, too cheerfully. "We're doing a quick go-around. Share your name, your branch, and what combat taught you about leadership." Groans followed. Some rolled their eyes. Others joked they needed coffee first. But the moderator was already pointing. "Lieutenant Merritt, you're up." Merritt stood with exaggerated flair. "Lieutenant Kyle Merritt, U.S. Army, 2 tours in Kandahar. Combat taught me that rank gets listened to faster when it's shouted." Laughter. He bowed sarcastically and sat. Then he pointed. "Doc, let's hear from the back row. You next, paperwork." Another chuckle. She looked up then. Not annoyed. Not humiliated. Just focused. Like she was deciding something in real time. "Dr. Lena Avery," she said simply. "Former field medic. 17 years active. 5 forward deployments. Combat taught me to count silence." The room quieted, confused. "To count silence?" someone asked, skeptical. "Yes," she replied, voice calm. "The way it falls when you're about to be overrun. The seconds between a mortar round and the scream. The sound when you're compressing a femoral artery and you know you don't have a tourniquet left. Combat taught me what that silence sounds like, and how long it lasts when your name is the only one still on comms. You could hear a pin drop. The jokes dried up. Jorgensen's jaw twitched. Merritt blinked. "Wait," he said, sitting straighter. "You were deployed?" She nodded, then adjusted her coat. The corner of a patch flicked free. The faded insignia of the 4th Battalion Medical Response, Forward Ox, an emblem not worn since 2006. Daggerlight. Malika asked suddenly, her voice hushed. Avery turned toward her, just for a moment. "You were there?" Malika's voice cracked. "You were her." Avery didn't answer. She didn't need to, because across the room, people were already remembering whispers of a medic who carried 3 soldiers across 400 meters of open terrain under enemy fire, of a survivor who refused extraction until her entire team was accounted for, of a woman who had vanished from the public eye right after. No one laughed again. Not that day. Not ever. And that's where it began, when the quietest person in the room described something none of them would ever forget. Because she wasn't a story in a shadow box. Not yet. She was still alive, and for the first time in decades, she'd decided to speak. No one moved. No one breathed loud. The air inside that fluorescent conference room had changed. Thicker now, weighted with something no one could name, but everyone felt. Dr. Lena Avery, the woman they'd snickered about just moments before, stood calmly at the back of the room, her cane resting lightly against her chair, her fingers still wrapped around a black leather notebook whose corners were worn soft from use. She didn't posture. She didn't raise her voice. She just opened the book and turned to a page marked only by a torn strip of gauze. June 14th, 2007, she began, her voice steady, neither cold nor dramatic, just certain. Kinner Province. No name. We never got one. Our forward operating station was 62 clicks from the nearest base. Medical evac was impossible. The comms tower had taken a hit 3 nights prior. That's when the perimeter started falling. Chairs creaked as veterans leaned in. Phones were put away. Even the panel moderator stepped back, no longer guiding anything. That night, Lena continued. They came at us with mortars first, 3 volleys. The kind that comes slow and deliberate, like they're not rushing because they know how close they already are. She paused, then scanned the room. I was 39. Old, they said. Too old to be crawling through blood and shell fragments. But I was the only one left who'd seen real trauma rotation. One by one, our fire support officers went down. I was triage, radio, command. For 37 hours, I moved body to body, giving last words to men who didn't know I'd been denied comms to send them. At 0700, the last of our ammo ran dry. That's when I made the call. Jorgensen's hand had dropped into his lap. Merritt stared, silent, as if trying to connect this woman with the ghost stories told in whispers during late-night watch shifts. I fired the flare, Lena said softly. Not to signal help. There was no one left to come, but to warn the next unit of what was waiting down the valley. She turned another page. Then I did what they trained me to. I took off my name tape, stitched it into the shirt of the youngest soldier left alive, and pushed him through the brush line with morphine and a compass. Told him not to look back. Told him if he survived, to lie about where he'd been, because no one would believe what he saw. The room remained still. Even the VA staff who'd wandered in to refresh coffee trays were frozen. You know why they classified Daggerlight? She asked, voice suddenly sharper. Because they didn't want headlines about a lost unit rescued by someone they'd written off. A woman. A medic. A civilian transition who never even got full pension. She let that hang. But I kept the records. Every name. Every date. Every casualty. Every one of them mattered. She lifted the notebook, then held it out to Malika, whose prosthetic hand trembled slightly as she accepted it. Your cousin, Lena said quietly. Specialist hero. He died in my arms. I promised I'd tell his story. No one would publish it. So I wrote it anyway. Malika's face crumpled, not in weakness, but in recognition. We thought it was just a rumor. That someone carried him. Lena nodded. I carried 4. He was the last. The silence in the room shifted again. It wasn't awkward now. It was reverent. Merritt tried to speak, but his throat caught. I didn't know, he finally managed. That's the point, she replied without venom. Most people don't. Because I never needed you to. But I needed someone to remember. Across the room, the panelist with the microphone stood slowly. "Dr. Avery," he said, voice cracking slightly. "Were you ever formally recognized?" She gave a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I got a certificate for exemplary field behavior. Folded it into a meal tray the next day." Someone laughed nervously. "She didn't. But I got something better," she said, her gaze flicking to Malika. "I got to see the next generation walk again." Then she sat down. No fanfare. No applause. Just quiet. The kind that comes after a storm has passed and left the world different than it was before. From that moment on, the tone of the entire summit changed. The jokes stopped. The bragging softened. And every time someone glanced at the quiet woman in the brown coat, it was with a new kind of awareness. The kind that comes when you finally realize the strongest warrior in the room was never trying to be noticed. She had just been waiting to see who was worth telling the truth to. 2 weeks later, the hallway outside conference room B looked different, quieter, more alert, like the walls had listened, too. A small brass plaque had appeared on the door with no ceremony, no speech, no ribbon to cut. Just a name, Dr. Lena Avery, Combat Medic 4th Battalion, Kiener Province. Below it, engraved in smaller letters, were the words, "She didn't ask to be remembered. We chose to." It wasn't official. It wasn't even funded. But no one dared remove it. And no one, especially not Lieutenant Merritt or Sergeant Jorgensen, laughed when they walked past it on their way to the next leadership seminar. Because something had changed in that room, and it hadn't stopped changing since. The moderator from the panel later told staff, "It felt like she walked in invisible and left casting a shadow that still hasn't faded." Lena Avery never returned to the facility after that day. Not for applause. Not for questions. Not even when the VA director requested a follow-up interview. She sent a brief note instead, handwritten, folded once. The job wasn't to be seen. It was to make sure someone else got home. And that would have been the last anyone heard, if not for what arrived in a plain manila envelope at the front desk the following Monday. No return address. No subject line. Inside, copies of pages from her notebook, names, medical sketches, timestamps, and a list of 12 soldiers with the headers "Survived," "Witnessed," "Verified." Attached was a final page marked in red, "For the record, you can redact the woman who saved them, but you cannot erase what they saw." The next morning, Malika stood in front of the director's office and quietly laid the envelope on his desk without a word. She didn't explain how she got it. She didn't have to. Later that week, the Department of Defense called. Not to investigate, not to reprimand, but to ask if they could speak with Dr. Avery directly. She declined. "I already said what mattered," she wrote in her reply. "The rest belongs to those still standing." Meanwhile, back at the center, a shift took root. The lectures changed. The Veterans Leadership curriculum added a new session, Silent Valor, when service isn't seen. And for the first time in recorded memory, the VA included a module co-authored by someone without a formal combat citation. Dr. Avery's name appeared beside it. Just 2 initials and a date. But those who knew what it meant sat straighter. Merritt and Jorgensen were both reassigned to the Outreach and Advocacy Team for Female Veterans. No demotion, no punishment, just a quiet redirection toward the voices they'd once dismissed. They didn't complain. They asked for it. Merritt, in particular, began reading case files differently, with more care. Sometimes, he sat in the empty conference room under that plaque and reread one line from her notebook that Malika had shared with him. "Pain doesn't need to speak to be real. It just needs someone who won't turn away." Months passed. The conference faded into the schedule like everything does, but not her. Because every time someone raised their hand and asked why certain names were missing from recognition walls, someone would tell the story. Not with drama, not with legend, just facts. There was a woman once. She stitched together the battlefield with her bare hands and carried the weight of 12 men on a spine that never fully healed. And when she was mocked, she said nothing, until it mattered. Malika, now fully embedded in the National VA Reform Board, carried Lena's notebook in her satchel like scripture. She quoted it often, never claimed credit, always cited LA in the margins, and by then, anyone in the room knew exactly who she meant. One day a senator asked, "Who trained you to lead like this?" And Malika just said, "The woman who saved my cousin." And that was enough. Lena Avery passed quietly in her sleep one spring morning, with no medals on the wall, no uniform by the door, and no visitors signed in that week. But when the facility went to log her belongings, they found something else. A single envelope addressed to whoever keeps watch after me. Inside, a list of names, a folded map of Künner, and one line in her sharp, steady handwriting. Don't teach them to be loud. Teach them to listen. That afternoon, the facility flag lowered without request. Not because she was famous, but because silence had to be honored when it had once saved so many lives. The following year, a new training division opened at the VA, dedicated to female combat medics and field trauma survivors. It bore no nameplate at first, but eventually, someone wrote it in marker on the back of the first field manual, Avery Doctrine. No one replaced it. The building now bears her name, and beneath it, carved in quiet stone, a phrase she never said out loud, but lived every day of her life: real courage doesn't speak. It carries.